Welcome to the deep dive. If you've had coffee this morning, maybe used your phone, or even just put on clothes that were made locally, chances are you're connected to the maritime sector. It's this huge, often invisible engine driving global trade.
It really is, and the scale is just staggering. The sources we looked at confirm it enables something like over 80% of all international trade in goods. I mean, its health is basically tied to global economic stability.
Yeah, absolutely. So its future is, well, a pretty massive strategic question for anyone thinking about logistics, infrastructure, you name it.
For sure. And that's what we're diving into today, the UK's Maritime 2050 strategy. It's a really long-term vision launched back in 2019.
And it's ambitious, right? Not just keeping pace, but really aiming to cement the UK as a, well, world-leading maritime nation right through to the middle of the century.
Exactly. The mission itself, it's quite a fascinating piece of joined-up thinking. They recognize you can't just tweak one bit without affecting everything else.
Right. Integrated strategy.
Precisely. So that ambition hinges on pulling together 7 core themes: technology, trade, infrastructure, environment, people, security and resilience, and maintaining that UK competitive advantage.
And what really jumps out is that this isn't just a document dropped out of nowhere. It builds on earlier work, like the 2015 Maritime Growth Study, which basically said, hey, we need a national strategy.
Yeah, and it stresses collaboration, government, industry, academia, all working together. It's meant to be a living thing, not just sit on a shelf.
Makes sense for something spanning 30 years. It needs that buy-in.
And it's structured too. They're not just saying, here's 2050, they've broken it down. Recommendations fall into short term, that's up to 5 years, immediate stuff, really. Then medium term, 5 to 15 years for the bigger shifts. And then the really long-term view, 15 years plus, taking us right up to that 2050 horizon.
That structure alone shows a serious level of commitment, I think.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. Where better to start than with the people who make it all happen? The human element, this section's just called people, skills, safety, welfare. What's the 2050 workforce supposed to look like?
Well, the vision is pretty clear. A diverse, well-rewarded workforce, one that actually sets a global benchmark for welfare. But the jobs themselves, they're changing radically.
How so?
We're moving away from, let's say, traditional seamanship roles towards jobs that are deeply technical, very data-driven, and highly skilled. This massively ramps up the need for, STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, maths.
So the old image of seafaring as maybe low-tech is just gone.
Pretty much obsolete, yeah.
Yeah.
Future roles are described as multidisciplinary. You won't just operate systems. You'll need to potentially create them, maintain them, adapt them, especially with autonomous systems coming online.
That sounds like a big shift in required capabilities. Huge. And it demands adaptability. Particularly for seafarers, there's this push for career fluidity. They need strong, transferable IT skills so they can move more easily between being at sea and taking on shore-based roles, management, maintenance, logistics, whatever.
So a career path, not just a job.
Exactly. Continuous professional development is key. It needs to be seen as a gateway, not a dead end.
Okay, that's the vision. But the strategy is quite upfront about a major hurdle. Recruitment.
Yeah.
There's been a decline in UK seafarers, right?
Yes, it doesn't gloss over that. Despite government funding efforts like the SMART program, which became SMART Plus, and funding set to hit 30 million hours a year now, the numbers have been a challenge.
And that funding, it's mainly for training cadets.
Primarily, yes. Helping them get their initial qualifications, their certificate of competency, and getting started. But the ambition now is more strategic, aligning the training for ratings and apprenticeships much more closely with what the industry actually needs, especially these high-tech skills.
Makes sense. But beyond just the numbers, there's the diversity issue. The stats mentioned in the sources are, well, they're pretty stark.
They really are. Globally, maritime is overwhelmingly male. In the UK, only 4% of certificated officers currently active at sea are female.
4%. Wow.
And that mirrors the global picture, which is even lower, maybe around 2% of the entire world's seafaring workforce.
That sounds less like a problem and more like a massive, completely untapped pool of talent.
That's exactly how the strategy frames it, as a huge opportunity. And there are concrete initiatives, things like the Women in Maritime Task Force, leading to the Women in Maritime Charter. These aim to tackle fairness and inclusion systemically.
And is there anything specific aimed at changing perceptions, making it seem like a viable career for more people?
Yes. Crucially, in the short term, they're funding something called the People Like Me Maritime Industry Project. It's based on similar campaigns that worked really well in other sectors, like rail transport.
What's the idea behind people like me?
It's about shifting the image. Instead of focusing on the stereotypical image of who works in maritime, it highlights the diverse skills and backgrounds of people who are already successful in the sector. It aims to make it more relatable, more appealing to a much wider range of people, changing the narrative from who we usually hire to what kind of person thrives here.
Okay, interesting approach. Now, shifting from getting people in to keeping them and looking after them, the sources paint a pretty sobering picture of seafarer welfare, particularly mental health.
Yeah, this is critical. The document is blunt globally. Maritime safety standards are still described as poor compared to other safety-critical industries like oil and gas. Fatal accident rates, especially in fishing, which is notoriously dangerous, are alarmingly high.
So the UK wants to lead by example on safety and welfare.
That's the aim. Leverage its reputation for quality, maintain high standards domestically, and really push for better standards globally. But the welfare aspect goes deep.
Especially the mental health side. Isolation, long trips.
Exactly. High rates of mental health issues, tragically high suicide rates. It's linked directly to that isolation, the long periods away, the pressure. And technology creates this weird paradox.
Yes, so.
Well, automation is driving efficiency, but it often means smaller crews. Fewer people on board can actually make that isolation worse, less social interaction over months at sea.
But surely tech can help too.
Well,
Connectivity.
that's the other side of the coin. Better connectivity at sea is seen as vital. Right now, it can be patchy, expensive, low bandwidth, but improving internet access allows seafarers to have proper, regular contact with home, with family. That directly tackles the loneliness, reduces that mental strain.
It seems fundamental. So what concrete actions are planned to improve welfare right now in the short term?
Some really significant ones. Developing a high-level social framework, basically setting out expected welfare standards, introducing specific mental health care guidelines for the industry, and maybe the biggest one,
Go on.
implementing a national minimum wage, the NMW, for all seafarers working within UK territorial waters.
A national minimum wage for everyone in UK waters, regardless of the flag of the ship.
That's the goal. Giving seafarers essentially the same basic pay protections as workers on land. It's a huge statement.
It really is.
Yeah.
But doesn't that create friction? Won't foreign ships just, avoid UK waters or ports if it costs them more? How does the strategy address that potential competitive disadvantage?
It's definitely a tension. By moving faster than international rules, there's always that risk. The strategy seems to rely on a couple of things. The UK's reputation for quality, and the fact that ships need to use UK ports, they're major hubs.
So banking on quality and necessity.
Partly, but also the long game is to push these same high standards internationally, lobbying hard at the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, and the ILO, the International Labor Organization. The idea is to level the playing field over time, make high welfare the global norm.
And are they pushing for anything else specific at the MILO level?
Yes. Specifically mentioned is pushing for limits on maximum hours worked per shift. Fatigue is a massive ongoing safety risk for seafarers, and getting international agreement on stricter limits is a major goal.
Okay, let's switch gears completely now. Technology, the digital revolution. This is obviously powering many of those new skills we were just talking about. The UK's ambition here is pretty bold. World-leading in designing and manufacturing smart shipping tech, not just using it.
It is bold. And the UK has a bit of a home advantage, hosting the IMO in London. But the first big step, the primary short-term goal, is actually domestic.
Which is?
Legislating, creating a clear UK legal framework specifically for autonomous vessels, uncrewed ships, remotely operated ships, that sort of thing.
Why start domestically? Why not go straight for international rule?
Because a clear domestic framework acts like a magnet. If you set clear rules at home covering liability, insurance, safe operation, that attracts international companies to come and test their cutting-edge tech in UK waters, it builds confidence.
Ah, I see. Test it here first.
Exactly. Prove it works safely under UK rules. Then the longer-term goal is to take that proven model, that experience, to the IMO and lead the conversation on establishing the international rules, setting the global standard.
That connects nicely to the UK's strengths in maritime law and insurance, which we'll get to. But despite this ambition, the sources are quite honest about why maritime can be so slow to adopt new tech. Why is that?
It boils down to some deep-seated structural issues in the industry. First, operating margins are often incredibly thin. There's just not much spare cash floating around for risky R&D.
Okay. Tight margins. What else?
There's the split incentive problem. Often, the company that owns the ship has to pay for the expensive new tech, but it's the company chartering or operating the ship that sees the fuel savings or efficiency gains. The benefit doesn't always go to the one making the investment.
Right, misalignment.
And then there's the lifespan of the assets. Ships last for decades. It's hard to build a solid business case for installing tech that might be outdated in 5 or 10 years on a vessel that needs to operate for 25 or 30. The payback isn't always clear, especially for unproven tech.
So overcoming that inertia is key. The strategy talks about aiming for a digital by default sector by 2050. What does that actually look like? What changes day to day?
It means moving away from centuries of paper. We're talking paperless governance, electronic registration of ships, real-time sharing of open data right across the supply chain, ship, port, customs, everyone.
So more transparency, more efficiency.
Exactly. Imagine smart contracts that can automatically adjust insurance premiums based on how safely a ship is operating in real time. Or digital seals on cargo containers that guarantee they haven't been tampered with from start to finish.
That sounds potentially transformative. How does all this data translate into tangible savings beyond just less paper?
The big one is maintenance and operations. Using the Internet of Things, sensors everywhere combined with data analytics and machine learning, you can move to predictive maintenance.
Instead of just fixing things on a schedule.
Right. Instead of costly routine maintenance where you replace parts whether they need it or not, sensors predict when a component is likely to fail. Maintenance gets scheduled optimally just before it's needed. That maximizes the ship's time earning money and minimizes expensive breakdowns at sea.
The strategy mentions the U.S. maritime tech scene raising serious venture capital, like $500 million in 5 years. Are there UK examples showing this digital push is already happening?
Yes, a key one is the Pilot National Maritime Single Window, the NMSW. You have to understand, historically, when a ship arrives in port, lots of different agencies, Border Force, Customs, Health, Port Authority, all want similar information. Crew list, cargo details, etc. But they all want it in different formats, on different forms.
Sounds like a nightmare.
It's a huge administrative burden, causes delays, errors. The NMSW aims to fix that. One single electronic portal where the ship submits all the required data just once. It then gets distributed automatically to the relevant agencies. It drastically cuts down on red tape and costs. It proves large-scale digitalization isn't just nice to have, it's essential.
But all this connectivity, all this data flying around, it brings us straight to the elephant in the room.
Cybersecurity.
Absolutely. It's highlighted as a major vulnerability, especially, as we said, given the sector's sometimes slow tech adoption. The sources warn that many vessels are still running older, sometimes proprietary IT systems. These systems can be vulnerable to cyber loopholes that were patched years ago in mainstream IT, like in banking or corporate networks.
So ships could be running outdated, vulnerable software.
Potentially, yes. The message is clear. Future technology has to be secure by design. Security can't be an afterthought bolted on later. It needs to be built in from the very beginning of designing the ship or the system. Okay, and finally on the tech front, smart ports. The vision seems to be ports as much more active hubs, not just places ships dock.
Definitely. They're seen as evolving from just transfer points into critical nodes in a really advanced integrated supply chain. The plan actually includes things like competitions to develop and test new port technologies.
Competitions.
Yeah, leading eventually to establishing a cross-sector maritime innovation hub within a UK port by 2030. This would be selected through an open competition. The idea is to foster these regional clusters of R&D around specific ports, linking them with local universities and tech firms to boost productivity.
And how do these smart ports link up better with the rest of the journey, the land part?
By using automation and digital processes to maximize how quickly goods move through the throughput, and then ensuring that links seamlessly with inland logistics. This means planning for things like autonomous trucks arriving at the gates, maybe truck platooning on the motorways, even using drones for quick local deliveries or inspections within the port area. It's about making the whole chain efficient, not just the sea part.
All right, let's shift focus again now to what's arguably the biggest challenge facing the sector globally, the green imperative. Environment and climate change. Shipping has a significant footprint.
It certainly does. International shipping currently accounts for about 2.2% of global CO2 emissions. And without major changes, that figure is projected to rise quite significantly as trade grows.
And the IMO, the international body, has set a target.
Yes, an ambitious one. At least a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 compared to 2008 levels. But the UK's Maritime 2050 strategy actually aims to go faster than that international baseline.
Faster. Why? Is it purely environmental conviction, or is there a strategic angle too?
It's definitely strategic. The thinking is that by being an early adopter, a first mover in clean maritime technology, the UK can gain significant economic advantages, build expertise, attract investment, capture a big slice of the future global market for green shipping solutions.
So being green is also about being competitive.
Absolutely. And to help make that happen, the government is looking at how economic instruments, things like carbon levies, maybe specific tax incentives, could be used to support that transition to zero-emission shipping in the medium to long run.
And domestically, there's a particularly striking target mentioned for ferries.
Yes, it's a very bold ambition laid out in the Clean Maritime Plan. The goal is for all domestic ferries operating in UK waters to be zero emission by 2050.
All of them. That's huge, given how many ferry routes there are.
It is. It essentially creates a large, guaranteed domestic market for zero-emission ferry technology and the supporting infrastructure, which should really stimulate innovation here in the UK.
The report does give concrete examples, showing this isn't just talk. What kinds of technologies are actually being trialed or used now?
We're seeing a mix. For example, up in Scotland, on the Clyde and Hebrides routes, there are already 3 hybrid roll-off ferries operating. They use diesel engines, but also have large lithium-ion battery systems to cut emissions, especially in port.
Hybrid is a start. What about truly zero-emission options, like hydrogen?
Hydrogen is a major focus, particularly in places like Orkney, which is brilliant for this because they have so much renewable energy potential, often more than they can use locally.
Right, wind power up there.
Exactly. So projects like Maritime are looking at adapting existing diesel engines to run partly on hydrogen. But even more ambitious is HySeas the Third. That project aims to build and operate the world's first seagoing ferry purely powered by hydrogen, carrying cars and passengers.
And the hydrogen itself would be green.
That's the plan. Produced right there in Orkney using surplus renewable electricity, so it completes the whole zero-emission cycle. Really clever.
It's fascinating, too, how older ideas like wind power are making a comeback, but with a modern tech twist.
Yeah, it's not just sticking up canvas sails. The T-Trig scheme, which funds transport innovation, has supported things like autonomous surface vessels, robotic cargo boats, essentially designed to be powered mainly by wind.
Autonomous wind-powered cargo ships.
That's the concept. And on a larger scale, we've already seen installations like the Norse Power rotor sails. Those big spinning columns fitted onto a Maersk tanker. They use wind to reduce the engine load and cut fuel consumption. It's proving commercially viable for big ships.
So lots of innovation.
Yeah.
But for the transition, cleaner fossil fuels like LNG still play a role.
They do. It's recognized that the shift won't happen overnight. So major UK ports like Southampton, T-Sport, Immingham, they've already invested in LNG liquefied natural gas bunkering facilities. This allows ships designed to run on LNG, which is cleaner than traditional marine fuels, to refuel.
Like that new British cruise ship, the Iona.
Exactly. The Iona, launched in 2020, was the first British cruise ship built to be powered by LNG. So you need that transitional infrastructure alongside the push for truly zero carbon fuels like hydrogen or ammonia.
Okay, so that's about mitigating climate change. What about adapting to the changes that are already locked in? Ports are obviously right on the coast. What are the big risks?
Ports are inherently vulnerable, yeah. The main risks are increased flooding, both from the sea, like tidal surges, and potentially from more extreme rainfall, inland overwhelming drainage, plus more frequent and intense storms disrupting operations.
And it's not just the port itself, but the connections behind it.
Critically, yes. Extreme weather can shut down the rail lines and roads that ports rely on to move goods inland. So you get these bottlenecks far away from the coast, impacting the whole supply chain. Resilience planning has to look at the whole system.
And since most big UK ports are privately owned, is it up to them to invest in things like flood defenses?
Largely, yes. They have to assess their own specific vulnerabilities, geographic, operational, and invest in resilience. The strategy mentions the Port of Immingham spending about £500,000 on flood resilience after the bad winter floods back in 2013-14. It shows the kind of proactive investment needed.
Lastly, on environment, the strategy touches on something created by climate change, the potential opening of Arctic trade routes.
This is a really complex one. As Arctic sea ice melts, routes like the Northern Sea Route along Russia's coast, or maybe the Northwest Passage over Canada, could become seasonally viable for commercial shipping.
And that offers a shortcut.
Potentially a huge one. Cutting Asia-Europe transit times by maybe 10, 12 days. That's massive commercially. And geographically, ports on the UK's east coast, Scotland, northeast England are well positioned to benefit if those routes become mainstream.
But the environmental risks in the Arctic are immense.
Absolutely critical. The strategy is very clear that the government is committed to putting environmental protection right at the heart of any discussions about Arctic shipping. The ecosystem is incredibly fragile, and the interests of local Arctic communities have to be paramount. It's a fine line to walk between potential opportunity and definite environmental responsibility.
Okay, let's move on to global competition and where the UK sees its strengths. We touched on this earlier, but the sources really hammer home the UK's dominance in maritime professional services.
Yes, this is seen as a core, perhaps the core, competitive advantage. The UK, particularly the City of London, is the undisputed global leader for maritime law, finance, insurance, shipbroking. It contributes billions to the economy.
Even with things like the Baltic Exchange being bought by Singapore.
Yeah, even with the Singapore Exchange acquiring the Baltic Exchange back in 2016, its operational heart, its influence, remains very much centered in London. It's still the place the global shipping industry comes to sort out complex deals, insurance, disputes, like a one-stop shop.
And it's not just London, right? This strategy mentions regional strengths too.
Absolutely crucial point. Major clusters exist elsewhere. Southampton and Liverpool are highlighted for their strengths in port operations, logistics, technical services. And the Scottish Maritime Cluster is noted for being particularly strong in things like specialized ship management. Supporting these regional hubs is seen as vital for the overall UK offer.
But holding onto that edge is getting tougher because the whole map of global trade is shifting dramatically.
This is probably the biggest strategic challenge running through the entire document. The world's economic center of gravity is shifting, visibly, irreversibly, eastward, away from the UK's traditional Atlantic focus.
Towards Asia.
Primarily Asia, yes. China and India becoming economic superpowers, driving huge domestic demand as well as manufacturing. The numbers are mind-boggling. The Asian middle class is forecast to grow by something like 153% by 2030. That's potentially 2 billion new consumers, adding maybe $30 trillion in spending power.
So it's not just goods moving west anymore, it's demand shifting east.
Exactly. The whole pattern of trade is changing. This isn't just about cheap manufacturing. It's about massive new consumer markets demanding finished goods, containerized imports, more complex logistics. And Africa is a huge part of this future picture, too.
How so?
The African youth bulge, a massive young population driving growth potential. West Africa, in particular countries like Cote d'Ivoire and Nigeria, are seen as becoming key trading partners in the future. The UK is actually geographically quite well placed for trade with West Africa.
All these shifts must demand incredibly flexible infrastructure. What does the strategy see for ports and shipbuilding in 2050?
Agility is the key word for infrastructure. Ports need to adapt fast to tech changes and these shifting trade flows. We'll likely see more specialization, maybe fewer huge megaports handling the bulk of deep-sea container traffic, but other ports diversifying into high-value niches.
Like what kind of dishes?
Things like offering value-added services. So instead of just unloading a car, maybe the port facility does some final customization before it goes to the dealer. Using port land for activities that add value and generate revenue beyond just handling cargo.
And the strategy mentions something quite futuristic, 3D printing hubs at ports.
Yeah, this is really interesting. The idea is locating manufacturing pools of industrial-scale 3D printers right there at the port. Raw materials come in by ship, the part or product gets printed on demand, then distributed inland.
What's the advantage?
Minimizes logistics costs, obviously, but it also supports the circular economy. You could potentially recycle materials locally and print new things, and it could be huge for supplying spare parts quickly to offshore industries like wind farms or oil rigs, reducing downtime waiting for a part shipped from halfway across the world.
And shipbuilding. The UK obviously can't compete with, say, South Korea or China on building giant container ships or tankers. So where's the focus?
It's definitely on high-quality, high-skill niche markets, playing to the UK's strengths in design and engineering. This means complex retrofitting jobs, installing new engines or scrubbers or ballast water systems onto existing ships, often to meet new environmental rules. That's high-margin work.
And things like luxury yachts.
Exactly. Building and fitting out super yachts, specialized research vessels, maybe high-end ferries, focusing on quality and bespoke design where the UK still has a strong reputation.
Finally, within the UK itself, there's a focus on increasing coastal and short sea shipping, moving freight by sea between UK ports.
Yes, this is seen as a really important opportunity. using the sea as a blue highway to take pressure off congested roads and railways. It's potentially much more environmentally friendly and efficient for moving certain types of freight around the country. This could boost business for a whole range of smaller regional ports, not just the big international hubs.
Okay, underpinning all of this economic activity, all this innovation, has to be security, both physical and increasingly cyber. Security and global governance is the next big theme.
Absolutely fundamental. The strategy states clearly that security is paramount for UK national interest and for business continuity. The UK aims to be at the forefront of anticipating and responding to threats, whether that's traditional piracy and maritime crime, terrorism, or these growing cyber threats against ships and port systems.
We talked about the economic power shifting east. Does that create risks for the way global shipping is governed? The rules everyone follows?
It potentially does. There's a geopolitical risk that as economic power shifts, the consensus around the current rules-based international system governed by bodies like the IMO under UN frameworks could weaken.
What might happen?
You could see challenges to establish norms, maybe even diplomatic deadlock, making it hard to agree on new global rules. Worst case, you might see standards becoming regionalized, with different trading blocs enforcing different rules. That would make global shipping incredibly complex and inefficient.
So the UK's approach is to defend the current system.
Proactively, yes. Working to monitor compliance with international agreements like the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLS, and championing that rules-based order which guarantees things like freedom of navigation.
And freedom of navigation is critical, given the UK's reliance on imports through specific sea lanes. Right. Choke points.
Hugely critical. The UK imports vast amounts of food, fuel, essential goods. Keeping strategic choke points open is a top security priority. The strategy uses the Strait of Hormuz as a stark example.
How much trade goes through there?
In 2016, something like 18.5 million barrels of oil flowed through it every day. And in that same year, 93% of the UK's liquefied natural gas imports from Qatar came through that single narrow strait.
Wow. So if that gets closed or restricted?
The impact is immediate and massive. Ships have to take huge detours, adding weeks to journeys, drastically cutting global shipping capacity, pushing up costs. Protecting those routes is vital.
Shifting to security at the port level, the strategy introduces this concept of looking beyond the fence. What does that actually mean?
It means ports need to think about security and resilience not just within their own boundaries inside the fence, but also about their dependencies on external infrastructure, things they don't directly control.
Like power supplies.
Communications. Exactly. Electricity grids, telecoms networks, the road and rail links connecting to the hinterland. A failure in any of those external systems could shut down the port just as effectively as an incident inside the fence. So resilience planning needs to identify those single points of failure outside the port and have contingencies in place.
And one final, maybe less obvious security threat mentioned is subsea cables.
Yes, the fiber optic cables lying on the seabed. They are the absolute backbone of the modern global economy. They carry almost all international data traffic trade transactions, financial data, communications, everything.
And the threat is damage or something else.
Damage is one risk, yes, accidental or deliberate, but there's also an issue of obsolescence. Many of the cables laid in the late 90s or early 2000s, the millennial cables are nearing the end of their design life. We need ongoing investment in new routes and ensuring there's enough redundancy in the network. A major disruption to these cables would have catastrophic economic consequences. Resilience and contingency planning for this hidden infrastructure is vital.
Well, this has been a truly comprehensive look at a really ambitious strategy. 7 interconnected themes, all driving towards that 2050 vision for UK maritime. It's clear that success isn't about tackling these in isolation.
Absolutely. Synergy is the key word here. It really depends on that partnership, government, industry, academia, all pulling in the same direction across all 7 areas. The big picture is about the UK being agile, being an early adopter of tech, but also, crucially, not compromising on safety and quality.
Which ties into that ambition for the UK ship register, right, to be a top-tier flag.
Exactly. Aiming to be in the top 10 globally, not just by size, but recognized for high standards. That quality marker is really important to the overall brand.
One thing that really stood out as a concrete near-term action was the plan to overhaul the main piece of shipping law.
Yes, the commitment to develop proposals for a new Merchant Shipping Act within 5 years, that's a huge undertaking. You have to remember the legislation that primarily governs shipping in the UK still basically traces its origins back to the Merchant Shipping Act of 1894.
1894.
Seriously. So replacing that Victorian-era framework is absolutely essential if you want to properly regulate autonomous vessels, digital processes, electronic documents, things the original lawmakers couldn't possibly have imagined. It's foundational for the future.
Okay, to wrap up, let's leave our listeners with a final thought. Something to mull over that connects a few threads we've discussed: trade shifts, demographics, competition.
Well, if you look across all the different parts of the strategy, you could argue that the single biggest factor shaping who leads the maritime world in 2050 might not actually be technology itself, because tech tends to spread globally eventually.
So what might it be instead?
It could be demographics and pure economic gravity. That unprecedented growth of the Asian middle class, we talked about 2 billion new consumers. The youth bulge driving growth in Africa. These forces are fundamentally reshaping global demand, pulling the world's economic center of gravity steadily east and south, away from the traditional North Atlantic economies.
So the provocative question for you, the listener, is this. If the core of future global demand and economic growth is decisively shifting east and south, how does a nation like the UK need to adapt its entire competitive offer? It can't just rely on its historical strengths like financial services in London. How does it need to change to fully integrate with and genuinely cater to these new primary global markets? That's the real strategic puzzle of adaptation and agility that will likely determine who leads and who follows in the maritime world over the next 25 years.